The thundering hooves of a chestnut mare kicked up dust along the winding trail as Florence Atwood leaned forward in her saddle, her heart racing faster than her horse. The gold claim papers tucked securely in her leather satchel were her last hope. Her father's final gift before consumption had claimed him just 3 months prior. Florence couldn't afford to be late, not when Sheriff Thornton had made it abundantly clear that her 24 hours to register the claim were nearly up. Coloma, California came into view as she crested the final hill, the small mining settlement nestled along the American River, glittering in the late afternoon sunlight of spring 1852. The town had exploded from nothing into a bustling hub after James Marshall's discovery at Sutter's Mill just 4 years earlier. Now, prospectors, merchants, and opportunists of all kinds crowded its muddy streets, each chasing their own golden dreams. Florence tugged her mare to a halt outside the land office, her gloved hands trembling as she dismounted. At 22, she'd never imagined she'd be alone in gold country, fighting to hold onto the last piece of her family legacy. Her father, Samuel Atwood, had been one of the first to stake a promising claim along a tributary of the American River, but his illness had prevented him from working it properly. Now it was up to her. "You're cutting it mighty close, Miss Atwood," called Mr. Fairchild, the elderly clerk, as she pushed through the door, the bell announcing her arrival with a cheerful jingle that belied her anxiety. "Sheriff's been by 3 times asking if you'd registered yet." "I'm still within my rights," Florence replied, removing her riding gloves and reaching for the papers. Her honey-brown hair had partly escaped its pins during the ride, and she tucked a wayward strand behind her ear. "Father's will was clear the claim transfers to me, and I have 24 hours from the reading of the will to register it." Mr. Fairchild's rheumy eyes darted nervously to the window. "That may be so, but Sheriff Thornton seems mighty interested in that particular plot. Says it borders his own claim and would be a natural extension." Florence set her jaw firmly. "My father worked himself to death to find that claim. It's mine by right." The door swung open again, the bell's chime cutting through their conversation. Florence's blood ran cold as Sheriff Thornton himself filled the doorway, his tall frame blocking the late afternoon light. His silver star badge gleamed on his chest, and the pistol at his hip seemed unnecessarily prominent. "Miss Atwood," he drawled, removing his hat with a mock courtesy that never reached his cold eyes. "I was beginning to think you might not make it in time. That would have been unfortunate." Florence stood straighter, clutching her claim papers. "I'm well within my time, Sheriff. I'm here to register my father's claim as my own, as is my legal right." Thornton's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Actually, there's been a complication." He produced a document from inside his vest. "You see, your father's claim overlaps with an extension I filed for last month. The eastern boundary is disputed territory." "That's impossible," Florence replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My father surveyed that land meticulously." "Did he now?" Thornton raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's not what the county records show." He turned to Mr. Fairchild. "Isn't that right?" The clerk swallowed visibly, his Adam's apple bobbing. I would need to check the maps, Sheriff." "Well then, let's check them," Florence insisted, her green eyes flashing with determination. As Mr. Fairchild hesitantly spread the county map across his desk, the door opened once more. Florence didn't turn immediately, too focused on proving the sheriff wrong, but she felt the shift in the room a new presence, bringing with it the scent of leather, horse, and open country. "Excuse me," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway, but I couldn't help overhearing. Florence turned to see a tall man in trail-worn clothes, his face partially shadowed by his hat. What caught her attention were his eyes, a startling blue, steady and clear as mountain water. Sheriff Thornton's expression hardened. "This doesn't concern you, stranger." The man stepped fully into the office, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. He wasn't young, perhaps 30 or thereabouts, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. "Actually, it does," he said calmly. "I saw it first." Florence stared at him in confusion. "Pardon me." The stranger's gaze shifted to her, then back to the sheriff. "I was there when Samuel Atwood staked that claim last autumn, helped him drive in the corner posts myself. There's no overlap with your property, Sheriff." He moved to the map and placed a finger precisely on a spot. "The boundary runs along this ridge, not the creek as you're suggesting." Sheriff Thornton's face darkened. "And who exactly might you be?" "Isaac Galloway," the man replied, inclining his head slightly. "I've been working claims up and down this river for 3 years now. I remember every inch of that boundary because Samuel and I spent an entire day marking it, and I've got the blisters to prove it." Florence studied Isaac Galloway with new interest. Her father had mentioned a fellow prospector who'd helped him stake his claim, but he'd never mentioned a name. Could this be the same man? Thornton's hand drifted closer to his gun. "Convenient timing, Galloway. Very convenient indeed." "I've been meaning to come to town for supplies," Isaac replied, seemingly unperturbed by the sheriff's implicit threat. "Saw Miss Atwood riding in and recognized Samuel's horse. Figured there might be trouble, given your reputation." The tension in the small office thickened like smoke. Mr. Fairchild looked as though he wanted to disappear under his desk. "Are you accusing me of something?" Thornton asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Just setting the record straight," Isaac replied. "The lady's claim is valid and doesn't encroach on yours by so much as an inch. I'll swear to that in front of a judge if need be." Florence found her voice. "Mr. Fairchild, I'd like to register my claim now, please, with Mr. Galloway as witness to its boundaries." The clerk looked from the sheriff to Isaac and back to Florence, clearly torn between fear and duty. Finally, with shaking hands, he reached for his ledger. "This isn't over," Thornton growled, jabbing a finger at Florence. "Your father's claim may look promising, but a woman alone can't work it. You'll be selling to me before the month is out." His gaze slid to Isaac. "And you, Galloway, you do well to remember who keeps the peace in Coloma." With that, he slammed his hat back on his head and stalked out, the door banging shut behind him. In the sudden quiet, Florence released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you, Mr. Galloway. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't arrived when you did." Isaac replaced his hat, the gesture unhurried. Samuel was a good man. He spoke often of his daughter back east. His eyes met hers briefly. "He'd be proud to see you fighting for what's yours." As Mr. Fairchild began the process of recording her claim, Florence studied Isaac Galloway more carefully. There was something solid about him, a steadiness that she found oddly comforting in this wild place where she had no allies. "Did you know my father well?" she asked. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Well enough to know he made the best corn whiskey this side of Kentucky and could out-curse a mule skinner when the mood took him." His expression softened at her surprised laugh. "But mostly, I knew him as a man of his word, a rare thing in these parts." Florence felt a pang of grief and gratitude. "I'd like to hear more, if you're willing, about your time with him." Isaac nodded. "I'd be honored." He glanced toward the window where the light was beginning to fade. "But Thornton isn't the type to give up easily. You need to be careful." "I intend to work the claim," Florence replied, lifting her chin. "I didn't come all this way just to sell it. A claim's hard work for anyone," Isaac said, studying her with new interest. especially alone. I'm stronger than I look, she countered, and I learn quickly. The ghost of a smile played across his features again. I don't doubt it, Miss Atwood. He turned as if to leave, then paused. I'm camped about a half-mile upriver from your claim, if you need anything. Thank you, Florence said, suddenly aware that this stranger was the closest thing she had to a friend in Coloma. I may take you up on that. As Isaac Galloway stepped back into the fading light of day, Florence couldn't help but wonder if fate had sent him to her aid, or if perhaps he had motives of his own for opposing Sheriff Thornton. Either way, she was grateful, but caution had served her well in life. She would reserve judgment on Isaac Galloway until she knew him better. For now, she had a claim to protect, and a new life to build in this rugged, unforgiving land where gold and greed made enemies of neighbors, and friends were as rare as the precious metal everyone sought. The next morning dawned crisp and clear as Florence rode out to her claim. She'd spent the night at Coloma's only decent boarding house, paying more than she could comfortably afford for a small room with a lock on the door. The settlement was no place for a woman alone, but she had little choice until she could establish herself at the claim site. Her father's rough-hewn cabin came into view as she rounded a bend in the river trail. It was a humble structure, logs chinked with mud, and a stone chimney clinging to one wall, but the sight of it brought unexpected tears to her eyes. This was where her father had spent his final months, dreaming of a fortune that had eluded him. As she dismounted, she noticed fresh boot prints in the soft earth around the cabin door. Someone had been there recently. Heart pounding, she reached for her father's old revolver, tucked securely in her saddlebag. She'd never fired it, but its weight gave her courage as she approached the cabin cautiously. The door stood slightly ajar. Florence took a deep breath, steadied herself, and pushed it open with the barrel of the revolver. "Miss Atwood," came a familiar voice from within. Isaac Galloway stood from where he'd been crouched at the fireplace, hands raised slightly at the sight of her gun. "Didn't mean to startle you." Florence lowered the weapon, relief and irritation washing over her in equal measure. "Mr. Galloway, what are you doing in my cabin?" "Getting it ready for you," he replied simply, gesturing toward the fireplace where a small blaze had begun to take the morning chill from the air. "Figured you'd be out today, and the place has been empty for weeks. Needed airing out, and there were some critters that had taken up residence." Now that he mentioned it, Florence noticed the cabin looked different than she'd expected. The floor had been swept, cobwebs cleared from the corners, and the lone window wiped clean enough to let in the morning light. "You had no right to enter without permission," she said, though her tone lacked real admonishment. "You're right," he conceded, reaching for his hat which lay on the rough-hewn table. "But I owed your father that much." He moved toward the door. "I'll leave you to it." Florence sighed, setting the revolver down. "Wait, please, I apologize for pointing a gun at you. You startled me." Isaac paused, his expression unreadable. "No offense taken. You're right to be cautious." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire. Florence glanced around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings: a narrow cot along one wall, a table with two mismatched chairs, a few shelves holding cookware and supplies, and a trunk she assumed contained her father's personal effects. "Thank you," she finally said. "For the fire." "And for yesterday." Isaac nodded, his hat still in his hands. "Your father mentioned you were coming out eventually. He didn't expect it would be under these circumstances." He hesitated. "Do you have any experience with placer mining, Miss Atwood?" "No," Florence admitted, "but I have my father's journal with his notes, and I'm a quick study." Isaac seemed to consider this. "It's backbreaking work, and dangerous, especially for—" He stopped himself. "For a woman," Florence finished, arching an eyebrow, For anyone alone, he corrected. Flash floods, claim jumpers. Accidents, it's no place to be without someone watching your back. Florence crossed her arms. Are you offering to watch my back, Mr. Galloway? A hint of a smile touched his lips. I'm offering to show you the basics. How to work a pan, what to look for, how to set up a sluice box. The rest would be up to you. Florence studied him, trying to discern his motives. Men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. That was a lesson she'd learned early. And what would you want in exchange? Isaac looked genuinely surprised by the question. Nothing, Miss Atwood. Consider it a debt paid to your father's memory. She wasn't entirely convinced, but she wasn't in a position to refuse help either. Very well. When can we start? No time like the present, he replied, reaching for a worn leather satchel he'd set by the door. From it, he produced a shallow metal pan. Let's head down to the creek and I'll show you how your father did it. As they walked the short distance to the water, Florence was acutely aware of Isaac's presence beside her, tall, solid, moving with the easy confidence of a man at home in the wilderness. There was something reassuring about him, despite her wariness. At the creek's edge, Isaac crouched down and motioned for her to do the same. The basic principle is simple, he explained, scooping sediment into the pan. Gold is heavy, about 19 times heavier than water and much heavier than sand or gravel, so when you agitate the pan just right. He demonstrated, tilting the pan and swirling the water in a practiced motion that slowly washed away the lighter materials, leaving darker sand behind. The trick is patience, he continued, his hands steady as he worked. Rush it and you'll wash away what you're looking for. Florence watched intently, noting the methodical way he moved his hands, the angle of the pan, the rhythm of his motions. When he finally pointed to tiny, gleaming flecks among the black sand, she couldn't help but gasp. That's it. That's gold. Isaac nodded, a genuine smile spreading across his face at her excitement. Not much, just a few flakes, but yes, that's what we're all chasing out here. He handed her the pan. Your turn. Florence took the pan nervously, aware of how closely he was watching her. Her first attempts were clumsy, water sloshed over the edges and she tilted too far, nearly losing everything. Here, Isaac said after her third frustrated attempt. Without warning, he moved behind her, his arms coming around to guide her hands. Like this, smooth, steady motions. Florence froze at his proximity, suddenly very conscious of his chest almost touching her back, his breath warm against her hair. His hands were calloused but gentle as they positioned hers correctly on the pan. Sorry, he murmured, seeming to realize the intimacy of the position. He quickly stepped back. Just trying to show you the technique. Florence fought the blush rising to her cheeks and focused on the pan, mimicking the motions he had shown her. This time, she maintained better control, and after several minutes of careful work, she could see dark sand beginning to separate. I think, is that? Isaac leaned forward to look, careful to maintain a proper distance now. Yes, madam, you've got yourself some color. The tiny golden flakes seemed to wink up at her from the pan, and Florence felt a surge of triumph disproportionate to the small amount she'd found. It's real, she breathed. It's actually real. Isaac chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. Did you think it wasn't? Florence looked up at him, suddenly self-conscious. I think part of me believed my father was chasing a fantasy, that I'd come all this way for nothing. Isaac's expression softened. Samuel wasn't a fool. This claim has promise, not a bonanza maybe, but steady color if you work it right. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. But you'll need more than a pan to make it pay. That's where a sluice box comes in. For the next few hours, Isaac showed her how to identify promising gravel beds, explained the principles behind sluice boxes and cradles, and demonstrated techniques for separating gold from other minerals. Florence listened attentively, asking questions and taking mental notes, determined to master every aspect of this unfamiliar work. By midday, she was exhausted but exhilarated. The small vial of gold flakes she'd collected might not amount to much in value, but it represented something priceless proof that she could do this, that her father's faith in the claim wasn't misplaced. "You're a natural," Isaac commented as they made their way back to the cabin. Most greenhorns take days to get the hang of the pan. Florence felt an unexpected glow of pride at his approval. "I had a good teacher." As they approached the cabin, Isaac suddenly threw out an arm, stopping her in her tracks. "Someone's been here," he said, voice low. Florence followed his gaze and saw fresh boot prints in the dirt, different from their own. The cabin door, which they'd closed upon leaving, stood open. "Stay here," Isaac said, drawing a revolver from his belt. "It's my cabin," Florence protested, reaching for her own gun. Isaac gave her a look that brooked no argument. "Please." Reluctantly, she stayed back as he approached the cabin cautiously, gun raised. He disappeared inside for a moment that stretched interminably before reappearing at the door. "They're gone," he called, "but they left something for you." Florence hurried forward, apprehension tightening her chest. Inside, the cabin appeared undisturbed except for a single sheet of paper placed prominently on the table. She picked it up, reading the crude block letters scrawled across it. "Women don't belong in the diggings. Sell to Thornton or regret it." Florence's hands trembled, but she forced herself to remain outwardly calm. "Charming welcome gift." Isaac took the note, his jaw tightening as he read it. "Thornton doesn't waste time." He crumpled the paper in his fist. "This changes things, Miss Atwood. You shouldn't stay out here alone." "I'm not leaving my claim," Florence replied firmly. "I'm not suggesting you abandon it, but you need protection." He paced the small confines of the cabin, clearly troubled. "I can help you set up proper defenses, show you how to secure the cabin. And I'll check in regularly." Florence studied him. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Galloway? The truth this time." Isaac stopped pacing, meeting her gaze directly. "Thornton's been pushing out small claim holders for months, buying some out, intimidating others, finding legal complications with the rest. He's building a mining empire by stealing from honest folks." His expression hardened. "I've seen it happen too many times without speaking up. Your father was the first one who tried to stand against him, and he stopped abruptly." "And what?" Florence pressed. Isaac's voice dropped. "I can't prove it, but I don't believe your father's illness took him as quickly as it did without help." Florence felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting Thornton wants this claim badly enough to threaten you openly. That's all we know for certain." Isaac's eyes held her steadily. "And I'm saying you don't have to face him alone." The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Florence sank into a chair, her mind racing. If Thornton had indeed hastened her father's death somehow, that changed everything. This wasn't just about a gold claim anymore, it was about justice. "What do you propose?" she finally asked. "For tonight, you should return to town. It's safer there. And leave my claim undefended, so Thornton can simply take it." Isaac shook his head. "I'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll make proper arrangements." Florence considered her options. She barely knew this man, yet instinct told her she could trust him, and she had few alternatives. "Very well," she agreed reluctantly, "but I'll be back at first light." As she prepared to leave, gathering the few things she'd brought, Isaac moved to help her saddle her mare. In the fading afternoon light, Florence caught him glancing repeatedly toward the surrounding woods, his expression vigilant. "Mr. Galloway," she said impulsively as she mounted her horse. "How did you really know my father?" Isaac looked up at her, shielding his eyes from the lowering sun. "We partnered briefly when I first came to these parts. He taught me much of what I know about prospecting." A shadow crossed his face. "And he saved my life once, during a cave-in at a claim we were working. I never got the chance to repay him." Florence nodded, understanding now. "Until now." "Until now," he agreed softly. As she rode back toward Coloma, Florence couldn't shake the feeling that her life had irrevocably changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. She had come west seeking only to claim her inheritance instead. She had found herself embroiled in a dangerous conflict with a powerful enemy. And she had found an unexpected ally in Isaac Galloway, a man whose quiet strength and integrity reminded her painfully of her father. A man who, despite his protestations of merely repaying a debt, seemed prepared to risk much on her behalf. The question that troubled her as she rode was simple. Why would Sheriff Thornton risk so much for one modest claim? What did her father find that made this particular plot of land so valuable? And how far would Thornton go to take it from her? She would return tomorrow with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain: she would not be intimidated into surrendering what was rightfully hers. Not by Thornton, not by his threats, not by her own fears. The Atwood claim was hers, and with Isaac Galloway's help, she intended to keep it. Florence's return to Coloma was met with curious glances and whispered conversations that died as she passed. Word traveled quickly in small mining communities, and clearly, her confrontation with Sheriff Thornton had become common knowledge. Mrs. Hollister, the stern widow who ran the boarding house, raised eyebrows at Florence's request for another night's lodging, but asked no questions as she accepted payment. Her small attic room felt stifling after the open air of the claim, but Florence knew Isaac had been right staying alone at the cabin after Thornton's threat would have been foolhardy. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with faceless men lurking in shadows and her father's voice calling warnings she couldn't quite understand. She rose before dawn, eager to return to the claim and determined to make more permanent arrangements for her safety. The town was still mostly quiet as she saddled her mare, though a few early risers moved about their business, shopkeepers preparing for the day, miners heading out to their claims, a wagon loaded with supplies making its way toward the main street. Florence mounted up and had just turned her horse toward the trail when a voice called out to her. "Miss Atwood, a moment, please." She turned to see a well-dressed man hurrying toward her. He was perhaps 50, with silver threading his dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard framing an intelligent face. "I don't believe we've met," Florence said cautiously. "Forgive me. Edward Markham at your service." He offered a slight bow. "I'm the editor of the Coloma Gazette and an old acquaintance of your father's." Florence studied him, trying to recall if her father had ever mentioned him in his letters. "What can I do for you, Mr. Markham?" "Actually, I was hoping I might do something for you." He glanced around before continuing, his voice lowered. "I understand you've had some trouble with Sheriff Thornton regarding your claim." Florence tensed. "News travels fast." "It's my business to know what happens in Coloma," Markham replied. "And what's happening with Thornton concerns me greatly. He's acquired 6 claims in the last 3 months, all of them adjacent to his original holdings, all from owners who suddenly decided to sell under questionable circumstances." "And you think my father's claim is next?" Florence surmised. Markham nodded. "Your father and I spoke several times before his passing. He believed he'd found something significant on his claim, something beyond the usual placer deposits." Florence's pulse quickened. "Did he tell you what it was?" "No, he was uncharacteristically secretive." "But whatever it was, I believe Thornton somehow learned of it." Markham's expression grew somber. Your father's sudden decline was convenient for certain parties. The implication echoed Isaac's suspicions, sending a chill through Florence despite the warming morning air. Do you have any proof? Nothing that would stand in court, Markham admitted, but I've been gathering testimonies from others who have been pushed out by Thornton, with enough evidence of a pattern. You could expose him, Florence finished, precisely, but I need more time. He glanced toward the sheriff's office down the street. And I need witnesses willing to speak publicly. Florence considered this. Mr. Galloway seems willing to stand against him. Galloway, Markham looked surprised. Isaac Galloway is helping you, you know him. By reputation only. Keeps to himself, but he's respected among the serious miners, known to be honest in his dealings. Markham seemed thoughtful. His support could be significant. Florence was about to ask more when she noticed a figure on horseback at the far end of the street, the unmistakable silhouette of Sheriff Thornton. "I should go," she said, gathering her reins. "But I'd like to speak more about this, Mr. Markham." "Come by the Gazette office any time," he replied, stepping back from her horse. "And Miss Atwood, be careful. Thornton's influence reaches further than you might expect." With a nod of acknowledgement, Florence urged her horse forward, deliberately taking a side street to avoid a direct encounter with the sheriff. As she left town, she couldn't help feeling that the stakes had risen considerably. It wasn't just about her claim anymore, it was about standing against corruption that threatened the entire community. The morning sun had just crested the eastern ridges when Florence approached her cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney and she spotted Isaac by the creek, apparently checking something in the water. He straightened as she approached, shielding his eyes against the sun. "You're earlier than I expected," he called, walking to meet her. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, dismounting. "Any trouble during the night? Just some coyotes getting curious." Isaac took the reins of her horse, his eyes scanning her face. "You look troubled. Did something happen in town?" Florence told him about her conversation with Markham as they walked toward the cabin. Isaac listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Markham's a good man," he said when she'd finished. "One of the few in these parts willing to stand against Thornton openly. If he's building a case against the sheriff, it could mean real change for Coloma. If he can gather enough evidence," Florence pointed out, "and find witnesses brave enough to testify." Isaac nodded, his gaze distant. "Fear's Thornton's greatest weapon. Most folks value their safety over justice." "And you?" Florence asked. "Where do you stand, Mr. Galloway?" His eyes met hers, clear and resolute. "I've stayed silent too long already. Your father tried to take a stand and look what it got him." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "But confronting Thornton directly is dangerous. We need to be smart about this." "First things first," Florence said pragmatically. "I need to secure my claim and find out what my father discovered that made it so valuable to Thornton." Isaac nodded. "I've been thinking about that. The cabin needs work, better locks, shutters for the window. And you shouldn't stay out here alone, at least not yet." "I won't be driven away by threats," Florence insisted, "not suggesting you should be, but there's safety in numbers." Isaac hesitated. "My camp isn't far. I could relocate closer. Set up near enough to hear if there's trouble, but maintain propriety." Florence considered the offer. The arrangement would raise eyebrows, certainly, but her reputation seemed a small concern compared to her safety and the truth about her father's death. "That seems sensible," she agreed. "And in the meantime, I need to learn everything I can about this claim. If my father found something important, there must be clues somewhere. Did he leave any papers? Maps, notes, journals?" "Yes, in town. I have his personal effects at the boarding house. I didn't want to bring them out until I was certain I could stay." Isaac nodded decisively. "Then let's get to work. I'll start on securing the cabin. You see what you can find in your father's things. Meet back here this afternoon." The plan agreed upon, Florence set about exploring the claim more thoroughly while Isaac began making improvements to the cabin. She walked the boundaries, noting the markers her father had placed, trying to see the land through his eyes. What had he discovered here that was worth killing for? The creek that ran through the property was typical of the area: clear, cold water flowing over a bed of rocks and gravel. Florence knelt at several spots, practicing the panning technique Isaac had taught her. She found color consistently, small flakes and tiny nuggets that confirmed the claim's value, but nothing extraordinary. By midday, she had covered most of the accessible areas without finding anything unusual. Frustrated, she returned to the cabin to find Isaac making considerable progress. He'd fashioned sturdy shutters for the window from spare lumber and was installing a more robust door latch. "Any luck?" he asked, pausing in his work. Florence shook her head. "Nothing that explains Thornton's interest. I'm going back to town to retrieve my father's papers. Perhaps they hold the answer. I'll finish up here and then move my camp closer," Isaac said. "Be careful in town. Thornton has eyes everywhere." Florence rode back to Coloma with a new awareness of the dangers surrounding her. The busy streets no longer seemed merely chaotic. Now she noticed watching eyes, hushed conversations that stopped as she passed, the occasional openly hostile glance. At the boarding house, she quickly gathered her father's effects: a leather satchel containing documents, a worn journal, and a few personal items. She was about to leave when Mrs. Hollister appeared in the doorway of her room. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Miss Atwood," the older woman said without preamble. "Sheriff's been asking questions about you and that Galloway fellow." Florence stiffened. "Has he indeed?" Mrs. Hollister nodded, her tight bun not moving a fraction with the motion. "Says you're in danger out at that claim alone. Offered to have one of his deputies check on you regular like." Her shrewd eyes studied Florence. "Mighty concerned he is, for a man who was trying to take your claim yesterday." "His concern is noted but unnecessary," Florence replied carefully. The landlady snorted. "That's what I told him. Said you seemed a capable sort who could manage her own affairs." She paused. "But you take care all the same. Men like Thornton don't like being crossed, especially by a woman." "Thank you for the warning," Florence said, genuinely touched by the woman's gruff concern. Mrs. Hollister nodded again. "Your room's paid through tomorrow. After that, I'll need to know your intentions." "I'll let you know by then," Florence promised, gathering her things. As she left the boarding house, Florence decided to take a less direct route back to the claim, avoiding the main street where she might encounter Thornton. This path took her past the offices of the Coloma Gazette, and on impulse, she stopped. Edward Markham was bent over a printing press when she entered, ink staining his fingers and a look of intense concentration on his face. He glanced up at the sound of the bell, his expression brightening when he recognized her. "Miss Atwood, I didn't expect to see you again so soon." Florence approached his desk. "I've been thinking about our conversation this morning. You mentioned my father believed he found something significant on his claim." Markham straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yes, though as I said, he was uncharacteristically secretive about the details." "Did he give you any hint at all? Anything that might point me in the right direction?" The editor's brow furrowed in thought. "He did mention something about the ridge where the two pines cross. Said that was the key. Does that mean anything to you?" Florence shook her head. "Not yet. But I intend to find out." She hesitated, then asked, "Mr. Markham, how well do you know Isaac Galloway?" "As I said, by reputation mainly. He came to these parts about 3 years ago, keeps mostly to himself, works his claims diligently, no trouble with the law." Markham gave her a questioning look. "Why do you ask?" "He's helping me with the claim. I'm trying to determine if his assistance comes with hidden costs." Understanding dawned in Markham's eyes. "Ah, well, I can tell you this much: Galloway and Thornton have history. Bad blood between them from what I gather, though I don't know the particulars." He leaned forward slightly. "But I've never heard anything to suggest Galloway isn't an honorable man, unlike some in these parts." This confirmed what Florence had begun to suspect: Isaac's willingness to help stemmed from more than just a debt to her father. He had his own reasons for standing against Thornton. "Thank you, Mr. Markham. That's helpful to know." She glanced toward the door, aware that she'd already spent too long in town. "I should be going." "One moment," Markham said, reaching beneath his desk. He produced a small pistol which he offered to her. "It's loaded and ready, smaller than most, easy to conceal in a pocket or reticule." Florence stared at the weapon, momentarily taken aback. "I have my father's revolver." "A second option never hurts," Markham replied simply. "Especially one that won't be expected." After a moment's hesitation, Florence accepted the pistol, tucking it into her pocket. "Let's hope I won't need it." "Indeed." Markham's expression was solemn. "Be careful, Miss Atwood, and if you discover what your father found, well, I'd be most interested to hear about it." With renewed caution, Florence made her way back to her horse and set out for the claim. The sun had begun its western descent, casting long shadows across the trail. She rode swiftly but alertly, one hand never far from her father's revolver. When she arrived back at the cabin, she found the improvements completed: sturdy shutters, a reinforced door with a proper lock, and even some basic furniture arranged more practically for defense. Isaac was nowhere to be seen, but smoke from a campfire rose from a small clearing about 100 yards from the cabin, visible through the trees. Florence unsaddled her horse, rubbing it down thoroughly before turning it out into the small corral Isaac had repaired. Then, with anticipation quickening her pulse, she settled at the rough-hewn table with her father's journal and papers. The journal was filled with daily observations: weather conditions, amounts of gold recovered, notes on techniques and equipment. Florence skimmed through entries from the past year, looking for anything unusual. Most seemed routine until she reached entries from about 2 months before his death. October 12, 1851 found unusual formation at north end of claim, near ridge where 2 pines cross. Different color in the rock. Taking samples. October 15, 1851 tests confirm suspicions, not just placer gold. This changes everything, must be cautious who I tell. October 20, 1851 T came by again with offer to buy. Refused, he's too interested, makes me wonder if he knows. Will speak to G about partnership possibility. October 27, 1851 not feeling well today. Strange, as I was fine yesterday. Must be the change in weather. The entries became shorter and less frequent after that, documenting her father's declining health. The final entry, dated just a week before his death, was barely legible. December 3, 1851 wrote to Florence. She must come. Must warn her about T. The map is with the deed. G will help if needed. Florence sat back, her heart pounding. The pieces were beginning to align. Her father had discovered something significant, likely a vein of gold rather than just placer deposits. Thornton had somehow learned of it and wanted the claim. And G almost certainly referred to Galloway. But what map? She'd seen no map with the deed when she'd registered the claim. Quickly, she spread out all the papers from the satchel. The deed was there, the official document with her father's name and the claim's boundaries carefully described. She examined it closely, holding it up to the fading light from the window. Nothing unusual was visible until she turned it over. There, on the back, faint lines had been drawn in what looked like lemon juice or some other invisible ink, a crude but effective method her father had taught her for sending secret messages when she was a child. The heat from the paper near the lamp gradually revealed a simple map of the claim, with an X marked near the northern boundary. Beside it, barely visible, ridge where two pines cross. A knock at the door startled her so badly she nearly upset the lamp. She hastily folded the deed and tucked it into her bodice before calling out, "Who is it?" "Galloway," came the reply. Relief washed over her as she moved to unlock the door. Isaac stood there, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "Camp's set up," he reported. "Close enough to hear if there's trouble, far enough for propriety's sake." He hesitated. "Brought you some fresh venison, thought you might be hungry." Florence realized suddenly that she hadn't eaten since morning. "That's very kind, would you? Would you like to join me? I found something in my father's journal you should see." Isaac nodded, stepping inside but leaving the door open, a gesture to preserve her reputation that Florence found oddly touching given their circumstances. As she prepared a simple meal using the venison and some supplies Isaac had apparently stocked in the cabin, Florence told him what she'd discovered. His expression grew increasingly grave as she recounted the journal entries and showed him the hidden map on the deed. "A vein," he said softly when she'd finished. "That would explain Thornton's interest. Placer gold is one thing, a vein is another matter entirely. Could be worth thousands, depending on its size and quality." "And worth killing for?" Florence asked quietly. Isaac's jaw tightened. "To a man like Thornton, without question." They ate in thoughtful silence for a few minutes before Isaac spoke again. "First light tomorrow, we'll check the ridge, see what your father found." He met her eyes across the table. "But you should know if it is a vein. Working it will require more than just you and a pan. It means serious mining equipment, possibly blasting, certainly help." "I have some savings," Florence said. "Not a fortune, but enough to get started." Isaac nodded slowly. "We should be careful who knows about this until we're sure. If Thornton gets wind that we're looking at the ridge." "He already suspects we know something," Florence pointed out. "Why else send that warning?" "True." Isaac finished his meal and stood. "I'll keep watch tonight. Get some rest tomorrow may bring answers neither of us is prepared for." As he moved to leave, Florence found herself reluctant to see him go. Despite having known him for just 2 days, she felt safer in his presence than she had since arriving in California. "Mr. Galloway," she said impulsively. "Isaac, thank you, not just for the help with the claim, but for believing me, for standing with me." He turned back, his expression softening in a way that made her heart beat just a little faster. "Your father was a good man, Miss Atwood. And from what I've seen, the apple didn't fall far from the tree." With that, he nodded a good night and stepped out into the gathering darkness, pulling the door closed behind him. Florence secured the lock and began preparing for bed, her mind whirling with the day's discoveries. Tomorrow they would investigate the ridge where the two pines crossed. Tomorrow they might find what her father had died protecting. And tomorrow, perhaps, they would begin to build a case against Sheriff Wade Thornton, a man who seemed willing to kill for gold. As she drifted toward sleep on the narrow cot, Florence realized that in just 2 days, her purpose had expanded beyond merely claiming her inheritance. Now she sought justice for her father, protection for others who might fall victim to Thornton's greed, and perhaps something she hadn't expected to find in this wild country, a partnership with a man whose quiet strength and integrity were beginning to mean more to her than she cared to admit. Dawn broke clear and cold over the claim, frost glittering on the grass outside the cabin window. Florence had risen before first light, too anxious about the day ahead to sleep further. She dressed warmly in her most practical clothes, a sturdy skirt over wool stockings, a flannel shirt beneath her jacket, and the sturdiest boots she owned. Her hair she braided and pinned securely beneath a wide-brimmed hat borrowed from her father's belongings. The map and journal secured in her pocket, she stepped outside to find Isaac already waiting, 2 steaming cups in hand. "Coffee," he offered, extending one to her. "It's strong enough to wake the dead, but it'll warm you up." Florence accepted gratefully, wrapping her gloved hands around the tin cup. "You're up early." "Never really went to sleep," he admitted. "Too much on my mind." She studied him over the rim of her cup. Despite his apparent sleeplessness, he looked alert, his blue eyes clear and focused. She wondered, not for the first time, what his story was, what had brought him to California, what had put that shadow in his eyes that appeared sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. "We should head out soon," he said, interrupting her thoughts. "It's about a mile to the northern boundary, and I'd like to be there and back before midday if possible." Florence nodded, finishing her coffee quickly. "I'm ready when you are." They set off on foot, Isaac leading the way along a barely discernible trail that wound through the wooded sections of the claim. Florence followed closely, the deed with its hidden map in one hand, her father's revolver in the other. The morning was quiet except for birdsong and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. "Your father was smart," Isaac commented as they walked. "Most of the early claims focused on the riverbanks and creek beds. He looked higher up, where fewer bothered to search." "He always said fortune favors the contrary," Florence replied with a small smile. "When others zigged, he zagged." Isaac chuckled. "Sound philosophy in these parts." They walked in companionable silence for a time, the trail gradually climbing as they approached the northern section of the claim. The trees grew denser here, mostly pine and cedar, with occasional clearings that offered glimpses of the valley below. "There," Isaac said suddenly, pointing ahead. "I think that's what your father meant." Florence followed his gaze to where 2 large ponderosa pines had grown so close together that their trunks crossed about 15 feet up, forming an X against the sky. The trees stood at the edge of a rocky ridge that marked the claim's northern boundary. "The ridge where the 2 pines cross," she murmured. "This has to be it." They approached cautiously, both scanning the surroundings for any sign of disturbance or danger. The area seemed untouched, no fresh footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there recently. "What exactly are we looking for?" Florence asked, studying the rocky ground. "If your father found a vein, there would be signs of his exploration," Isaac replied, moving closer to the ridge. "Test holes, maybe some loose rock where he took samples." They began to search methodically, examining the ridge and the surrounding area. After about 20 minutes, Florence called out, "Isaac, over here." He hurried to join her at a spot about 10 yards east of the crossed pines. A section of the ridge face showed clear signs of recent work, chisel marks in the stone, a small pile of rocky debris at its base. "This is fresh," Isaac confirmed, crouching to examine the markings. "Within the last few months, certainly." Florence handed him the deed with its hidden map. "According to this, what he found should be right here." Isaac studied the map, then the rock face, his experienced eyes seeing details Florence missed. "Help me clear away some of these loose rocks," he instructed. Together, they moved the debris that had accumulated at the base of the ridge. As they worked, a section of the rock face became visible that was distinctly different from the surrounding stone, a vein of quartz running through the darker granite. "There," Isaac breathed, pointing to golden flecks visible within the quartz. "That's it." Florence stared at the vein, understanding now what had excited her father and what had likely cost him his life. The vein was narrow but clearly defined, running vertically through the rock face and disappearing both above and below the visible section. "How significant is this?" she asked, her voice hushed. Isaac examined the vein carefully before answering. "Hard to say without proper testing, but from what I can see, very. Quartz veins like this can be incredibly rich, and this one seems relatively easy to access." He glanced at her. "Your father found something valuable, Florence. Something worth killing for if Thornton knew about it." The use of her given name didn't escape her notice, but the gravity of the moment overshadowed the small intimacy. "We need to document this," she said decisively. "Proof of what's here, proof that it's on my claim." "Agreed." Isaac stood, brushing dust from his hands. "But we should be careful. The more people who know about this, the more danger you're in until we can deal with Thornton." "Markham," Florence suggested. "He could document it officially, publish it in the Gazette if necessary." Isaac nodded slowly. "That could work. Make it public knowledge, too widely known for Thornton to simply take by force." He looked thoughtful. "We should also file an expansion of your mineral rights with the land office. Specifically for hard rock mining, not just placer claims." As they discussed their next steps, a twig snapped in the woods behind them. Both whirled toward the sound, Florence raising her father's revolver, Isaac reaching for his own weapon. "Who's there?" Isaac called sharply. "Show yourself." After a tense moment, a figure emerged from the trees, a young man, barely out of his teens, with a shock of red hair and a nervous expression. "Don't shoot," he said quickly, hands raised. "Sheriff sent me to keep an eye on the claim, make sure Miss Atwood was safe." Florence kept her revolver steady. "And you are Jimmy Barton, madam, deputy?" "Well, sort of deputy. Sheriff hired me last week." Isaac's expression hardened. "Thornton sent you to spy on us, you mean?" The young man flushed. "Just following orders." "Sheriff said there'd been threats against Miss Atwood, wanted to make sure she was protected." "How considerate of him," Florence remarked dryly. "And how long have you been watching us?" Jimmy shifted uncomfortably. "Since yesterday afternoon. Sheriff wanted to know if you found anything unusual." Florence and Isaac exchanged glances. The situation had just become more complicated. If Thornton already had men watching the claim, their discovery wouldn't remain secret for long. "Jimmy," Florence said, lowering her weapon slightly, "do you know why Sheriff Thornton is so interested in my claim?" The young man hesitated. "Not exactly, madam, but he's been talking about expanding his operations, says he's got big plans for this area. Big enough to kill for." Isaac asked bluntly. Jimmy paled. "I don't know nothing about that. I just do what I'm told." Florence studied him thoughtfully. He seemed genuinely uncomfortable, more boy than man despite the badge pinned to his vest. "Jimmy, I think you should go back to town and tell the sheriff you didn't see anything unusual, just a woman and her hired help working a regular placer claim." Jimmy looked uncertain. "He won't believe that. He knows I've been watching all morning." "Then tell him we went for a walk to check the boundaries," Isaac suggested. "Nothing more." The young deputy's eyes darted between them, conflict evident on his face. "Sheriff Thornton isn't a man you want to cross, mister. He's got half the town in his pocket and the other half too scared to speak against him." "And where do you stand, Jimmy?" Florence asked gently. He swallowed hard. "My ma's sick. Sheriff pays good money, better than I could make mining." His expression became earnest. "But I don't hold with hurting women or stealing claims, madam. That's not what I signed on for." Florence made a swift decision. "If you're willing to help us, we can pay you too, for accurate information about what Thornton is planning." Isaac shot her a warning glance, but she continued. "We need allies, Jimmy. People willing to stand for what's right. Your mother would be proud of such a son." The appeal to his better nature seemed to work. After a moment's internal struggle, Jimmy nodded. I'll tell him I didn't see nothing special. But you best be careful. Sheriff's been in a foul mood ever since you registered that claim, Miss Atwood." "Thank you, Jimmy," Florence said sincerely. After the young deputy had disappeared back into the woods, Isaac turned to her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "That was risky. We don't know if we can trust him." "Sometimes you have to take a chance on people," Florence replied. "Besides, he's young and clearly uncomfortable with whatever Thornton is planning. He might become a valuable ally." Isaac conceded the point with a nod. "We should head back to the cabin, make plans." As they walked, Florence's mind raced with possibilities. They had confirmed what her father had found, a potentially rich gold vein right at the boundary of her claim. Now they needed to secure it legally and protect it physically, until they could build a case against Thornton. "We'll need to go into town," she said as the cabin came into view. "File the expanded mineral rights, speak with Markham, perhaps gather supplies for a more extended stay at the claim." "I'll go with you," Isaac said firmly. "After what we've discovered, I don't think you should travel alone." Florence didn't argue. The stakes had risen considerably, and Thornton's desperation would only increase once he learned they had found the vein. She would need Isaac's protection and his knowledge of mining if she hoped to succeed in working her father's claim. As they prepared for the journey to town, Florence found herself watching Isaac more closely than before. There was more to his involvement than just repaying a debt to her father or opposing Thornton. She sensed a deeper motivation that he had yet to reveal. "Isaac," she said as they saddled their horses, "you never told me what happened between you and Sheriff Thornton. Why there's bad blood between you, as Markham put it." His hand stilled on the saddle strap. For a long moment she thought he might not answer. Then, without looking at her, he spoke in a voice so low she had to strain to hear it. "2 years ago I had a partner, James Everett. Good man, skilled miner. We found a promising claim south of here, started working it together." His jaw tightened. "Thornton wanted it, made offers, then threats. When we refused to sell, there was an accident. A support beam gave way in a shaft we were digging. James was killed instantly." Florence's heart ached at the pain evident in his voice. "You believe Thornton was responsible?" It wasn't a question, but Isaac nodded anyway. "The beam had been partially sawed through, but I couldn't prove it was Thornton's doing. No witnesses, no evidence that would stand in court. 2 weeks later, while I was still grieving, the claim was mysteriously reassigned due to a paperwork error." "To Thornton," Florence guessed. "To a business associate of his," Isaac corrected, "who sold it to Thornton 6 months later for 10 times what it was worth." Understanding dawned. "So this isn't just about my father or my claim, it's personal for you." Isaac finally looked at her, his blue eyes intense. "Yes. But that doesn't mean I'm not committed to helping you, Florence. Your father was kind to me when I arrived here with nothing but the clothes on my back. And what Thornton's doing, it needs to stop. Someone has to stand against him." Florence reached out impulsively, placing her hand on his arm. "We'll stand together then. For my father, for your partner, and for everyone else Thornton has wronged." The connection between them seemed to deepen in that moment, a shared purpose, a mutual understanding of loss and injustice, and perhaps something more that neither was ready to name. As they mounted their horses and set out for Coloma, Florence felt both trepidation and resolve. They were embarking on a dangerous course, challenging a powerful man who had already proven himself capable of murder. But for the first time since her father's death, she felt something like hope. With Isaac at her side and the truth of her father's discovery to support their cause, perhaps justice was possible after all. And if, in the pursuit of that justice, her feelings for this quiet, honorable man continued to grow, well, that was a complication she would face when the time came. For now, they had a corrupt sheriff to oppose and a gold claim to protect. Everything else would have to wait. The ride to Coloma was tense, both Florence and Isaac alert for any sign of trouble. They took a circuitous route, avoiding the main trail where an ambush might easily be arranged. Though neither spoke of it, both understood that Thornton's knowledge of the gold vein and their discovery of it changed everything. The sheriff would be desperate now, and desperation made men dangerous. They reached town without incident and made directly for the land office. Mr. Fairchild seemed unsurprised to see them together, though his nervous glances toward the window suggested he expected trouble. "Miss Atwood, Mr. Galloway," he greeted them, adjusting his spectacles. "What can I do for you today?" "I need to file an expansion of mineral rights on my claim," Florence stated, removing the necessary papers from her satchel, specifically for hard rock mining. Fairchild's eyebrows rose. "Hard rock, that's unusual for your area." "Nevertheless," Florence replied firmly, "it's what I require." The clerk hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Very well. The fee is $15, and you'll need to specify the exact location within your claim where you intend to conduct hard rock mining operations." As Florence completed the paperwork, carefully marking the location of the vein without making it too obvious, Isaac kept watch at the window. The main street was busy with the usual traffic of miners, merchants, and townsfolk, but there was no sign of Sheriff Thornton or his deputies. "Will there be anything else?" Fairchild asked as he stamped the documents and recorded the changes in his ledger. "Yes," Florence said, lowering her voice. "We need to know if Sheriff Thornton has filed any recent claims near mine, or if he's attempted to challenge my boundaries." The clerk glanced nervously at the door before replying. "He was in yesterday asking about the northern boundary of your property, wanted to know if there had ever been any disputes about it." Fairchild leaned forward slightly. "I told him the records were clear your father's survey was properly registered and has never been contested." "Thank you, Mr. Fairchild," Florence said sincerely. "You've been most helpful." Their next stop was the Gazette office, where they found Edward Markham setting type for the next edition. He welcomed them warmly but with obvious concern. "You found something," he surmised after locking the door behind them. "I can see it in your faces." Florence nodded. "A gold vein, just as my father indicated, rich enough to explain Thornton's interest and possibly his involvement in my father's death." Markham's expression grew grave. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Atwood, one that could get you killed if made without irrefutable proof." "We're gathering that proof," Isaac said, stepping forward. "But in the meantime, we need protection, the kind that comes from public knowledge." Understanding dawned in Markham's eyes. "You want me to publish what you found? Make it too widely known for Thornton to simply take by force or deception." "Exactly," Florence confirmed. "Not all the details, just enough that the town knows my claim has significant value and that I intend to work it properly, with Mr. Galloway's assistance." Markham considered this. "It could work. Thornton prefers to operate in the shadows. Public scrutiny makes him uncomfortable." He moved to his desk and began jotting notes. "I could run a piece in tomorrow's edition about the promising developments at the Atwood claim, the partnership between yourself and Mr. Galloway. And perhaps mention that documents detailing the claim's value have been placed with trusted individuals, to be released in the event of any unfortunate accidents," Isaac suggested grimly. Markham nodded approvingly. "Very good. Thornton understands self-preservation above all. If he believes his own position would be threatened by harm coming to either of you." As they discussed the specifics of the article, Florence couldn't help but feel they were playing a dangerous game. They were essentially announcing their discovery to Thornton, while simultaneously warning him against direct action. It was a calculated risk, but one that seemed necessary given the circumstances. "There's something else," Florence said when they had finalized the details of the article. "We've potentially turned one of Thornton's deputies, Jimmy Barton. He seems uncomfortable with whatever Thornton is planning." Markham looked intrigued. "Young Barton. Interesting. His mother was a friend of my late wife's good woman, raised the boy alone after his father died in '49. If he's having second thoughts about working for Thornton, that could be valuable. Or dangerous if Thornton suspects his loyalty," Isaac pointed out. "True enough," Markham agreed. "Tread carefully there. Thornton doesn't forgive betrayal." With their business at the Gazette concluded, Florence and Isaac made their way to the general store to purchase supplies. As they loaded their purchases onto their horses, Florence became aware of whispers and stares from passers-by. Their association was clearly causing talk. A single woman living on a remote claim with a male assistant was fodder for gossip in a town like Coloma. "People are talking," she observed quietly as they prepared to depart. Isaac glanced around, noting the curious onlookers. "Let them talk. Your reputation won't matter much if Thornton manages to steal your claim or worse." "I suppose not," Florence agreed, though the situation still made her uncomfortable. She had always conducted herself with propriety, and the implied impropriety of their arrangement stung more than she cared to admit. As they mounted their horses, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the street. Sheriff Wade Thornton, flanked by two deputies. He spotted them immediately, his hand moving to rest casually on his holstered pistol as he approached. "Miss Atwood, Mr. Galloway," he called, his voice carrying clearly down the street. "Just the people I wanted to see." Florence felt her heart rate accelerate, but she kept her expression neutral as the sheriff drew near. "Sheriff Thornton," she acknowledged coolly. "What can we do for you?" Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I understand you've been expanding your operations out at the Atwood claim." "Hard rock mining now, is it? That's ambitious for a woman alone." "I'm not alone," Florence replied, nodding toward Isaac. "Mr. Galloway has agreed to partner with me in developing the claim." "Has he indeed?" Thornton's gaze shifted to Isaac, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "Well, isn't that convenient? I don't recall you having much luck with partnerships in the past, Galloway." Isaac's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Times change, Sheriff. So they do." Thornton returned his attention to Florence. "I'm concerned about your safety, Miss Atwood. Hard rock mining is dangerous work, and that claim is isolated. My offer to purchase still stands at a very generous price, considering the circumstances." Florence met his gaze steadily. "Thank you for your concern, Sheriff, but my answer remains the same. The claim is not for sale." Thornton's facade of civility slipped slightly. "You might want to reconsider, Miss Atwood. Gold fever makes men do terrible things. Two people alone out there. Accidents happen. They do indeed," Isaac replied, his voice dangerously calm. "Especially when they're arranged. But some accidents have witnesses these days, and consequences." The implication hung in the air between them, a clear warning that they knew more than Thornton might have suspected. The sheriff's expression hardened. "Careful, Galloway. Accusations like that could be considered slander." His hand tightened on his gun belt. "And I take my reputation very seriously." "As do I," Florence interjected, eager to diffuse the tension. "Which is why Mr. Galloway and I are developing the claim properly, with all legal requirements observed. Mr. Markham is even doing a piece about it for the Gazette." This information seemed to catch Thornton off guard. He glanced toward the newspaper office, a flicker of concern crossing his features before he masked it. "Well, isn't that interesting?" he said finally. Local girl makes good, is that the angle? Heartwarming. His tone suggested it was anything but. Just remember, Miss Atwood, the paper only prints what Markham allows it to, and there are many sides to every story. With that thinly veiled threat, he tipped his hat and moved past them, his deputies following like shadows. Florence released a shaky breath once he was out of earshot. He knows about the vein. Yes, Isaac agreed grimly, and he's not going to give up easily. He glanced at the setting sun. We should get back to the claim before dark. I don't trust Thornton not to have men watching the trails. They rode swiftly, taking the same indirect route back to the claim. The encounter with Thornton had left Florence shaken, but also more determined than ever. His threats only confirmed what they already suspected: the sheriff would stop at nothing to acquire her claim and the riches it contained. As they approached the cabin, Isaac suddenly held up a hand, signaling her to stop. "Something's wrong," he said quietly, dismounting and drawing his revolver. Florence followed suit, her hand moving to the small pistol Markham had given her. In the fading light, the cabin looked undisturbed, but Isaac's tension was palpable. "What is it?" she whispered. "Tracks," he replied, pointing to the ground. "Fresh. Someone's been here while we were gone." They approached cautiously, Isaac in the lead. The cabin door stood slightly ajar, though Florence was certain they had locked it before leaving. Isaac motioned for her to stay back as he pushed the door open with the barrel of his gun. The interior was in disarray, furniture overturned, her father's trunk pried open, the mattress on the cot slashed. Someone had searched the cabin thoroughly, with no attempt to hide their intrusion. They were looking for the map, Florence realized, or any documentation of the vein. Isaac nodded grimly. Thornton must have sent them as soon as he confirmed we'd filed for hard rock mining rights. He holstered his weapon and began righting the overturned furniture. "At least you had the deed and journal with you." Florence helped him restore order to the cabin, a sense of violation fueling her anger. This was her home, her father's legacy, and Thornton had desecrated it without hesitation. "We need to be ready," she said as they worked. "He'll try something more direct next time." Isaac glanced at her, concern evident in his expression. "Florence, perhaps you should consider staying in town for a while, at least until we can gather more support against Thornton." She shook her head firmly. "I won't be driven from my own claim." "That's exactly what he wants, to scare me away so he can challenge my ownership due to abandonment." "Then we fortify," Isaac decided, "and we don't leave the claim unattended again." As they finished restoring order to the cabin, a new thought occurred to Florence. "The vein," she said urgently. "We should check if they found it." Despite the encroaching darkness, they made their way back to the ridge with lanterns. To their relief, the site appeared undisturbed, the vein still hidden by the loose rocks they had carefully replaced after their discovery. "They didn't find it," Isaac confirmed after a thorough examination, "but we need to mark this claim properly, make it official." "Tomorrow," Florence said decisively, "we'll stake it properly and begin working it. Show Thornton and everyone else that we're serious about developing this claim legally." As they walked back to the cabin, Florence felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. The danger was real, Thornton had made that abundantly clear, but so was the opportunity. With Isaac's help, she could fulfill her father's dream of a successful mining operation and perhaps find justice for his untimely death. That night, Isaac insisted on sleeping outside the cabin, despite Florence's protests. "I'll be more effective as a guard out here," he explained. "I can see anyone approaching from any direction." Reluctantly, she agreed, securing the repaired door and closing the newly reinforced shutters before retiring to the cot. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams haunted by Thornton's threats and visions of her father working alone at the vein, unaware of the danger closing in on him. She woke before dawn to the smell of coffee. Dressing quickly, she found Isaac already up, tending a small fire outside where he was preparing a simple breakfast. "You look like you barely slept," he observed, handing her a cup of coffee. "Neither do you," she countered, noting the shadows beneath his eyes. He shrugged. "I've gone longer without sleep. We have work to do today." After a brief meal, they gathered tools and headed for the ridge. The morning was clear and cool, the forest around them peaceful in a way that belied the danger they faced. At the site of the vein, they worked methodically, clearing away more of the surrounding rock to expose the full extent of the quartz formation. "This is even better than I thought," Isaac said as more of the vein became visible. "The gold content is high, and the vein is wider than it first appeared. With proper equipment, we could be taking out significant amounts within weeks." Florence felt a surge of vindication. Her father had been right, this was worth fighting for. "Then let's stake it properly and get started." They spent the morning marking the boundaries of the hard rock claim, driving stakes into the ground and creating a clear record of their intention to mine the vein. Isaac explained each step carefully, teaching Florence the legal requirements and practical considerations of hard rock mining. By midday, they had established a legitimate claim that would be difficult for even Thornton to challenge legally. The next step was to begin extracting gold from the vein, a more challenging prospect without proper equipment. "We can start with hand tools," Isaac explained as they took a brief rest. "Chisel away samples of the quartz and crush it to extract the gold. It's slow work, but it will establish our active mining operation while we arrange for better equipment." Florence nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. The physical labor was demanding, but she found she didn't mind it. There was something satisfying about working the claim herself, following in her father's footsteps. "My father would be pleased," she said softly, looking at their morning's work, "to see his claim being developed properly." Isaac's expression softened. "He'd be proud of you, Florence. Not many women would have the courage to take this on." The compliment warmed her more than it should have, and she found herself studying Isaac's face, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the set of his jaw that spoke of determination and resilience. In just a few days, he had become essential to her plans, her safety, her very future in this wild country. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching horses. Both tensed, reaching for their weapons, but relaxed slightly when they recognized Jimmy Barton riding toward them, accompanied by another young man Florence didn't recognize. "Miss Atwood, Mr. Galloway," Jimmy called as they approached. "Got news from town." Florence and Isaac descended from the ridge to meet the riders. Jimmy looked nervous but determined, while his companion, a stocky young man with dark hair and a serious expression, regarded them warily. "This is my friend, Tom Wilkins," Jimmy introduced. "Works at the assay office. He's willing to help us." Isaac eyed the newcomer cautiously. "Help us how?" Tom dismounted, removing his hat respectfully. "Jimmy told me what's happening, about the sheriff and your claim." He glanced at Florence. "My pa had a run-in with Thornton last year, lost his claim under suspicious circumstances too. I believe what you're saying about him." "Tom has access to the assay records," Jimmy explained eagerly. "All the samples that come through, who submitted them, their gold content." Understanding dawned on Florence. "You think Thornton has been having samples from my father's vein assayed?" Tom nodded. 3 months ago, Sheriff brought in quartz samples that tested extraordinarily rich. Wouldn't say where they came from, but the timing matches what Jimmy told me about your father's claim." Isaac's expression darkened. That would explain how Thornton knew about the vein before Samuel died. He must have been watching him, saw him take samples from the ridge. "There's more," Jimmy said, lowering his voice though there was no one else to hear. "Sheriff's been gathering men, rough sorts not from around here, paying them well and telling them to be ready." Florence felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool mountain air. Ready for what? Jimmy looked uncomfortable. Didn't say exactly, but word among the deputies is that he's tired of waiting. Plans to resolve the Atwood situation tonight. Isaac's hand moved to his revolver. "How many men?" "At least 6, maybe more," Jimmy replied. "Too many for just the two of you to handle." Florence exchanged a glance with Isaac, seeing her own concern mirrored in his eyes. This was escalating faster than they had anticipated. Thornton was moving to take the claim by force, regardless of legal consequences. "We need help," she said quietly. Isaac nodded grimly. "Jimmy, ride back to town. Find Markham, tell him what's happening. See if he can rally any support among the townsfolk who have had enough of Thornton's tactics. Tom, go with him," Florence added. "Your testimony about the assay records could be crucial." The young men nodded, clearly nervous but determined to help. As they prepared to depart, Florence impulsively reached out to touch Jimmy's arm. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Both of you. This isn't your fight, but you're risking much to help us." Jimmy straightened in his saddle. "My pa always said a man's character is measured by what he does when no one's looking. I reckon this is one of those times." As the young men rode away, Florence turned to Isaac. "What now?" His expression was resolute. "Now we prepare for a fight. And hope Markham can bring help before Thornton brings war to your doorstep." The afternoon passed in a flurry of activity, as they fortified the cabin as best they could, barricading windows, creating firing positions, stockpiling water and ammunition. Isaac moved his few belongings from his camp to the cabin, erasing any evidence of their separation that might divide their defensive efforts. As dusk approached, they sat together at the rough-hewn table, a simple meal between them largely untouched. The tension was palpable, each lost in their own thoughts about the night to come. "Isaac," Florence said finally, breaking the silence, "if something happens to me tonight, I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done." He looked up, his blue eyes intense in the lantern light. "Nothing's going to happen to you, not while I'm breathing." The conviction in his voice stirred something deep within her. "Still, I need to say it. You could have walked away at any point. This isn't your fight, not really, and yet you've risked everything to help me." Isaac reached across the table, hesitantly covering her hand with his. "You're wrong, Florence. This became my fight the moment I saw you standing up to Thornton in the land office." His grip tightened slightly. "You reminded me of what it means to have principles, to stand for something. I'd forgotten that after James died." Florence turned her hand beneath his, twining their fingers together. The touch was intimate, crossing boundaries of propriety she had always carefully observed. But in this moment, possibly their last quiet moment together, such concern seemed trivial. "If we survive this," she said softly, "what happens next?" Isaac's gaze held hers, something unspoken passing between them. "We develop your claim, make it the successful operation your father envisioned." He paused, then added more quietly, "and perhaps we see where this leads." The meaning was clear in his eyes, in the gentle pressure of his hand on hers. Florence felt her heart beating faster, a flush warming her cheeks that had nothing to do with the small fire in the hearth. Before she could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats shattered the moment. Isaac was on his feet instantly, moving to the window to peer through a crack in the shutters. "Riders," he reported grimly. "At least 8, coming fast. Armed?" Florence joined him at the window, her breath catching at the sight of the approaching men. Sheriff Thornton rode at their head, his badge gleaming in the moonlight, his face set in grim determination. "It's too soon," she whispered. Markham and the others won't have had time to gather support. Isaac checked his revolver, his expression hardening. Then we stand alone. For now. As the riders drew closer, Florence felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened in the hours to come, she would face it with courage for her father, for justice, and for the future she had just begun to imagine with the man beside her. She took her position at the second window, Markham's small pistol ready in her hand. "For what it's worth, Isaac," she said quietly, "I'd like to see where this leads to." His eyes met hers briefly, a smile touching his lips despite the gravity of their situation. Then his attention returned to the approaching danger, his voice dropping to a steely whisper. "Let's make sure we get that chance." The riders halted about 50 yards from the cabin, spreading out in a loose semicircle that cut off any easy route of escape. Sheriff Thornton urged his horse forward a few paces, raising his voice to carry clearly through the night air. "Miss Atwood, Mr. Galloway, this is Sheriff Thornton. I have a warrant to search these premises for stolen mining equipment. Come out peacefully and no one needs to get hurt." Florence and Isaac exchanged glances, both recognizing the transparent lie for what it was, a legal pretext for Thornton to enter the cabin and potentially discover evidence that would justify arresting them or seizing the claim. "There's no stolen equipment here, Sheriff, as you well know," Isaac called back, "and we don't recognize your authority to search private property on false pretenses." Thornton's face darkened with anger, visible even in the moonlight. "I don't need your recognition, Galloway. I have the law on my side." "The law or your gun," Florence countered, her voice carrying clearly through the night. "Because from where I stand, they seem to be the same thing in Coloma these days." A murmur ran through Thornton's men at her bold challenge. The sheriff silenced them with a sharp gesture before responding. "I'm giving you one last chance to come out peacefully, Miss Atwood. After that, I'll have no choice but to use force to execute this lawful warrant." Isaac's grip tightened on his revolver. "He's going to rush the cabin," he murmured to Florence. "When they do, aim for the men on the flanks first. They'll be trying to get around to the back." Florence nodded, steeling herself for the violence to come. She had never shot at a human being before, but with her life and her future at stake, she would do what was necessary. "Time's up," Thornton shouted. "Men, secure the..." His order was interrupted by the sound of more riders approaching from the direction of town, a large group, moving fast. Thornton whirled in surprise as at least a dozen mounted men emerged from the trees, led by Edward Markham, and, to Florence's astonishment, Mrs. Hollister from the boarding house, riding astride like a man. "What the hell is this?" Thornton demanded as the newcomers formed a line opposite his men. Markham urged his horse forward. "This, Sheriff, is what happens when a town finally says enough. We've come to ensure that justice is properly served, not your version of it." Florence could hardly believe what she was seeing. Behind Markham stood an unlikely assortment of Coloma citizens, shopkeepers, miners, even Mr. Fairchild from the land office, all armed and resolute. "You're interfering with official business," Thornton blustered, though Florence noted that several of his men were looking distinctly uncomfortable with this new development. Official business conducted at night, with armed men against a lone woman, Mrs. Hollister called out scornfully. "Strange timing for serving a warrant, wouldn't you say, gentlemen? We know what you're really after, Thornton," Markham added. "The gold vein on the Atwood claim. The same vein you've been trying to get your hands on since Samuel first discovered it." Thornton's hand moved toward his gun. "That's slander, Markham. I'll see you in jail for this." "I think not," came a new voice as another rider pushed forward, a distinguished-looking man in a fine suit that seemed out of place in the wilderness setting. especially considering the evidence we've gathered against you." Florence turned to Isaac in confusion. "Who is that, Judge Morris?" Isaac replied, a note of hope entering his voice for the first time. "Circuit judge for this district. Markham must have sent for him." The judge addressed Thornton directly. "Sheriff, I've received sworn statements from multiple citizens regarding your conduct in office intimidation, claim jumping, possible involvement in at least 2 suspicious deaths. Serious allegations that warrant investigation." Thornton's face had gone pale, but his expression remained defiant. "These are lies, Your Honor. I've served this community faithfully." "Then you'll have the opportunity to prove your innocence," the judge replied evenly. "In the meantime, I'm suspending you from your duties pending a full inquiry." For a moment, it seemed Thornton might resist. His hand hovered near his pistol, his eyes darting between the judge, Markham's group, and the cabin. Several of his own men had already backed their horses away, clearly unwilling to oppose a federal judge. "This isn't over," Thornton finally growled, glaring at the cabin. "Not by a long shot." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away into the darkness. After a moment's hesitation, the remainder of his men followed, leaving the clearing quiet except for the soft snorting of horses and the collective sigh of relief from those who remained. Florence and Isaac emerged cautiously from the cabin, hardly daring to believe the confrontation had ended so abruptly. Markham dismounted and hurried to meet them, his face alight with triumph. "We did it," he exclaimed. "Jimmy and Tom reached us with your warning, and we managed to intercept Judge Morris on his way through to Sacramento. Once he heard what was happening, he insisted on coming directly here." The judge himself approached, offering a formal bow to Florence. "Miss Atwood, I apologize for the ordeal you've endured. Rest assured, Sheriff Thornton will answer for his actions." "Thank you, Your Honor," Florence replied, still somewhat dazed by the sudden turn of events. "But I'm concerned he won't give up so easily." "He won't," Isaac agreed. "Not while the gold vein remains unclaimed." Judge Morris nodded understanding. "Which is why I've brought the necessary documentation to formalize your hard rock mining claim immediately, with these good people as witnesses. By morning, your right to that vein will be incontestable, even by Thornton's creative legal maneuvering." As the judge returned to his saddlebags to retrieve the papers, Florence turned to Isaac in wonder. "I can hardly believe it. Is it really over?" He took her hand, his touch no longer hesitant. "Not entirely. Thornton will face a tribunal and we'll both need to testify, and developing the claim will still be hard work." His fingers tightened around hers. "But the immediate danger, yes, I believe that's past." The relief was overwhelming. Florence felt suddenly light-headed, the tension of the past days releasing all at once. Isaac seemed to sense her unsteadiness, his arm coming around her waist to support her. "Easy," he murmured, concern in his eyes. "It's been a long day." His proximity, the solid strength of his arm around her, sent her pulse racing in a way that had nothing to do with danger now. With the threat diminished, Florence became acutely aware of how close they stood, of the way his eyes lingered on her face. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Hollister, who approached with a knowing look and a basket covered with a cloth. "Thought you might need provisions," she said, handing it to Florence. "Proper food, not whatever bachelor fare Mr. Galloway's been providing." Florence accepted the basket gratefully. "Mrs. Hollister, I never expected to see you riding to our rescue." The older woman sniffed. "My late husband lost a claim to Thornton's scheming 3 years ago, died of heartbreak 6 months later. Been waiting for a chance to see that man get what's coming to him." Her stern expression softened slightly. "Besides, Girl like you showing such spine reminded me of myself at your age." As Mrs. Hollister moved away to join the others, Isaac's hand found Florence's again, squeezing gently. "You've made quite an impression on Coloma in a short time." "We both have," she replied, returning the pressure of his fingers. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Isaac." His expression grew serious. "Before, in the cabin, what you said about seeing where this leads." He hesitated, suddenly uncertain in a way that seemed at odds with his usual confidence. Florence felt a rush of warmth at his vulnerability. "I meant it." Around them, the impromptu posse was beginning to disperse, some returning to town with the judge, others setting up camp nearby to ensure Thornton didn't return with reinforcements. In the commotion, Florence and Isaac found a moment of privacy near the cabin door. "I've admired your courage from the first moment I saw you," Isaac said quietly. "But these past days, working alongside you, seeing your determination, your intelligence." He took a deep breath. "Florence, I know it's sudden, but I find myself caring for you in a way I didn't expect." The simple honesty of his declaration touched her deeply. "It's not so sudden," she replied softly. "My father wrote about you in his letters, you know. He said you were a man of integrity, someone he respected. I think I began to care for you before we even met." Isaac's eyes widened slightly. "He wrote about me," Florence nodded. "He said if ever I needed help in California, I should seek out Isaac Galloway, that you were one of the few men he would trust with his daughter's welfare." A shadow of emotion crossed Isaac's face, surprise, gratitude, and perhaps a touch of regret that Samuel hadn't lived to see this moment. "I wish I'd known that," he said finally. "It would have meant a great deal." "You honored his trust anyway," Florence pointed out. "You came to my aid when you saw me in trouble, with no expectation of reward." Isaac's thumb traced gentle patterns on the back of her hand. "And now?" The question hung between them, full of possibility. Florence looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time, and felt a certainty she had never experienced before. "Now," she said softly, "we build something together. The mine, yes, but more than that, if you want it to." His answer came not in words but in action, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and full of promise. Florence responded with a warmth that surprised even herself, her hand rising to rest against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they separated, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I want it," he whispered. "More than I've wanted anything in a very long time." The sound of approaching footsteps caused them to step apart, though their hands remained linked. Judge Morris appeared, papers in hand, his expression professionally neutral though his eyes twinkled with understanding. "If you're ready, Miss Atwood, Mr. Galloway, we should complete these formalities while we have witnesses present." The next hour was spent signing documents, with Markham, Mrs. Hollister, and several others witnessing the official registration of their hard rock mining claim. By the time the paperwork was complete, the gold vein was legally secure, registered jointly in the names of Florence Atwood and Isaac Galloway as equal partners. That should withstand any legal challenge Thornton might attempt, the judge assured them as he gathered the papers. "I'll file these personally when I reach Sacramento." As the night drew on, the impromptu gathering slowly dispersed. Some returned to town, while others, including Jimmy Barton and Tom Wilkins, made camp nearby, determined to stand guard through the night despite Isaac's assurances that he and Florence would be fine. Finally, they found themselves alone in the cabin, the door secured behind them. The single room felt different somehow, no longer merely a shelter, but the beginning of a home. "It's been quite a day," Florence said, suddenly shy despite the intimacy they had shared earlier. Isaac nodded, removing his gun belt and hanging it on a peg by the door. "One I won't soon forget." He hesitated, glancing at the single cot. "I can still sleep outside if you prefer." Florence considered the impropriety of their situation, then decided it mattered far less than she once would have thought. "No," she said firmly. "I think we've both had enough of being separated by circumstances. You belong in here with me." The smile that spread across his face was worth any scandal their arrangement might cause. "In that case, Miss Atwood," he said, stepping closer and taking her hands in his, "I believe we were discussing our future before we were so rudely interrupted." Florence laughed softly, the sound bright in the quiet cabin. "So we were, Mr. Galloway, and I believe we were just getting to the interesting part." His arms came around her waist, drawing her close. "The part where I tell you that I'm falling in love with you. That I want to build not just a mining operation, but a life with you." The words sent a thrill through her that outshone even the excitement of securing her claim. "Yes," she whispered, her hands sliding up to frame his face. "That would be the interesting part indeed." Their second kiss was deeper, fuller, a promise of all that lay ahead. When they finally parted, Isaac kept her close, his expression serious once more. "It won't be easy," he warned. "Developing the mine, testifying against Thornton, building a place for ourselves here. There will be challenges we can't even foresee." Florence nodded. "I know, but we'll face them together." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, still marveling that she had found not just an ally but a partner in this wild country. "My father used to say that nothing worth having comes without struggle. I think he was right." Isaac smiled, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "Samuel was right about many things, especially when he saw the potential in this claim." His eyes met hers, full of warmth and promise. "And when he trusted me to protect his daughter." "You've done more than protect me," Florence replied softly. "You've shown me that I'm stronger than I knew, that I can fight for what's mine." "That you can," he agreed, pride evident in his voice. "Though I hope the fighting is behind us now." As if to emphasize his words, the night around them was peaceful, no sound of approaching riders, no threats lurking in the darkness. Just the quiet whisper of wind in the pines and the distant murmur of the creek where they had first begun to know each other. Florence leaned her head against Isaac's chest, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. In just a week, her life had transformed completely from a grieving daughter seeking only to claim her inheritance to a woman defending her rights, finding justice for her father, and discovering love in the most unexpected circumstances. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, developing the mine, building their case against Thornton, establishing their place in the community. But tonight, in the quiet of the cabin her father had built, Florence knew that whatever came next, she would not face it alone. "Isaac," she murmured, looking up at him with a smile that held all her hopes for their future. "I saw it first." His questioning look gave way to understanding, and then to laughter as he recognized her reference to his own words in the land office, the moment that had begun their journey together. "So you did," he agreed, pressing his forehead to hers in a gesture that had already become familiar and cherished. "So you did." In the days and weeks that followed, Florence and Isaac worked side by side to develop the Atwood claim. With the immediate threat from Thornton neutralized by his suspension and the pending investigation, they were able to focus on establishing a proper mining operation. Isaac's experience proved invaluable as they hired a small crew of trusted miners, purchased equipment, and began the methodical process of extracting gold from the rich vein. The first assay results confirmed what they had suspected: the quartz vein contained gold of exceptional quality, and in quantities that promised substantial returns on their investment. With each passing week, the operation grew more sophisticated and more profitable. As spring gave way to summer, changes came to Coloma as well. Thornton's suspension became permanent after the judge's investigation uncovered extensive corruption. Several deeds to claims he had acquired through intimidation were declared invalid and returned to their rightful owners. The former sheriff now faced multiple charges, including possible involvement in the deaths of Samuel Atwood and James Everett, though gathering sufficient evidence for murder charges proved challenging. Edward Markham's Gazette became a stronger voice for justice in the community, with Florence occasionally contributing articles about mining techniques and opportunities for newcomers. Mrs. Hollister, to everyone's surprise, revealed a talent for organization and became a respected voice in town affairs, helping to establish Coloma's first proper school. Through it all, Florence and Isaac's relationship deepened. The scandal of their living arrangement gradually faded as the success of their mine and their obvious devotion to each other won over even the most critical observers. By midsummer, they were generally accepted as a couple, though some still raised eyebrows at their unconventional arrangement. On a warm evening in August, as they sat together on the porch Isaac had added to the cabin, Florence rested her head against his shoulder and watched the sunset painting the western sky in hues of gold and crimson. "I received a letter from Judge Morris today," she said, her fingers intertwined with Isaac's. "Thornton's trial is set for October. We'll both need to testify." Isaac nodded, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Are you ready for that, to face him again?" Florence considered the question. "Yes," she said finally. "For my father, for your partner James, for everyone else he's wronged. It's time for justice to be served." "And after the trial?" Isaac asked, a note in his voice suggesting he had given this considerable thought. Florence turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Isaac shifted slightly, facing her more directly. "After Thornton is dealt with, after this chapter is closed, I've been thinking about our future." Something in his expression made Florence's heart beat faster. "Have you?" "I have." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold ring, clearly handmade, with a small, perfect nugget of gold set into the band. "I made this from the first gold we extracted together from the vein." Florence stared at the ring, then at Isaac's face, hardly daring to believe what was happening. "Florence Atwood," he said softly, holding the ring between them, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. I came to California searching for gold, but I found something infinitely more precious in you. Your courage, your intelligence, your heart. You've made me a better man than I ever thought I could be." He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "I love you. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life by your side as your husband, your partner in all things." Tears welled in Florence's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Isaac," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "nothing would make me happier." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. "I remembered what you said that night when Thornton and his men came for us, about seeing where this leads." Florence smiled through her tears. "And now we know." Their kiss was tender and full of promise for their future together, for all the days and years that stretched ahead. When they finally separated, both somewhat breathless, Isaac kept her close in the circle of his arms. "Your father would approve, I think," he said quietly. "I know he would," Florence replied, resting her head against his chest. "He sent me to California to claim my inheritance. He couldn't have known that inheritance would include you." Isaac pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Or that his daughter would transform not just a gold claim but an entire community, and me along with it." As darkness settled over the claim, they remained on the porch, planning their future together. The wedding would be small but joyful, held in Coloma with their newfound friends as witnesses. They would continue to develop the mine, but also consider other ventures, perhaps a supply store for miners or investments in the growing town. And someday, children to fill the larger home Isaac had already begun planning in his mind. Florence thought of the journey that had brought her here, from the grief of her father's death to the discovery of his legacy, from her confrontation with Thornton to finding love with Isaac. It had been a path filled with danger and uncertainty, but it had led to a future brighter than she could have imagined. As they finally rose to enter the cabin that had become their home, Florence paused in the doorway, looking back at the peaceful claim bathed in moonlight. Somewhere, she liked to think, her father was watching, satisfied that his daughter had not only claimed what was rightfully hers, but had found the happiness he had always wished for her. "Coming?" Isaac asked, holding out his hand to her. Florence smiled, taking his hand and stepping across the threshold into their shared future. Always. 1 year later, the Galloway Mining Company was the most successful operation in the Coloma region. The original vein had led to the discovery of additional deposits, and with careful management, Florence and Isaac had expanded their holdings while maintaining fair practices that set them apart from many of their competitors. Their wedding, held in the newly constructed church in Coloma, had been the social event of the season. Edward Markham had served as Isaac's best man, while Mrs. Hollister had stood proudly with Florence in place of the mother she had lost years before. The entire town had celebrated with them, recognizing in their union a symbol of the community's own transformation. Wade Thornton had been convicted on multiple counts of corruption, fraud, and intimidation. Though the murder charges hadn't stuck due to insufficient evidence, he had been sentenced to 15 years in the state prison, justice of a sort, though Florence sometimes wondered if her father and James Everett would have considered it enough. On the first anniversary of their confrontation with Thornton, Florence and Isaac stood together at the ridge where they had first discovered the vein that had changed their lives. A proper mining operation now surrounded the site, with scaffolding, equipment, and a crew of 20 men working under their direction. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Isaac remarked, his arm around Florence's waist. "So much has changed." Florence leaned into his embrace, her hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her stomach, their first child, due in the winter. "For the better, I'd say." "Definitely for the better," Isaac agreed, his hand covering hers. "Though I still can't quite believe how it all began. If I hadn't happened to be in the land office that day, or if my father hadn't befriended you years before," Florence added, "or if Thornton hadn't been quite so greedy and obvious about it." Isaac chuckled. "A lot of ifs, but here we are." Here they were indeed, married, prosperous, respected, and with a child on the way. The cabin had been expanded into a proper home, though they had preserved the original structure as the heart of it. Florence had established a small library in town, using profits from the mine to provide books and education for the growing number of families settling in the area. "I've been thinking," Isaac said as they turned to walk back toward their home. "Maybe it's time to consider partnering with some of the smaller claim holders. Pool resources, share equipment, help them develop their claims properly." Florence smiled, recognizing in his suggestion the same sense of justice and fairness that had drawn her to him from the start. "That's a wonderful idea. We could create something more sustainable than the usual boom and bust of gold mining. A legacy beyond just wealth," Isaac agreed. "Something our child can be proud of someday." As they reached their home, Florence paused to look back at the claim that had started it all, her father's final gift to her, the land that had brought her both challenges and blessings beyond measure. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when I first arrived in Coloma, all I wanted was to secure what was legally mine. I never imagined finding a home here or building a future so different from anything I'd planned." Isaac's eyes were warm as he gazed at her. Life has a way of surprising us, sometimes for the better. He placed a gentle hand on her stomach where their child grew. "And sometimes those surprises are the greatest gifts of all." Florence covered his hand with hers, feeling the simple gold wedding band that had replaced her engagement ring. "Indeed they are," she agreed softly. As they entered their home together, Florence thought again of that fateful day in the land office of a corrupt sheriff threatening her claim, and a cowboy stepping forward to say, "I saw it first." How those simple words had changed everything, setting in motion a journey that had led to justice, to love, to family, to home. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important turns in life's path come when we least expect them. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, they lead us exactly where we need to be.